Every week, Question Time travels to a different part of the country. Tonight, we've come to Kettering in Northamptonshire. A town that grew rapidly in the 19th century, becoming famous for its leatherwork and shoe factories. It's now a major logistics hub for companies including Primark and DFDS. It's also home to the Weetabix factory and Wicksteed Park, one of the UK's oldest theme parks. As usual, our audience members arriving here this evening reflect the general political picture across the nation. And tonight they want to talk about the war with Iran, Britain's role in it, and also events closer to home. Welcome to Question Time. From the government, the Foreign Office Minister Stephen Doughty. One of his main roles is fostering good relations with the United States. He says, despite the tensions over Iran, Britain will never turn away from its staunch ally. For the Conservatives, James Cleverly is the Shadow Housing Minister, a former Foreign Secretary. He's criticised Keir Starmer's response to the conflict, saying he was a day late and a dollar short. Shashank Joshi is the Economist's defence editor. He writes about modern warfare, nuclear deterrence and arms control, and is an expert on Iran's weapons programmes. Annabel Denham is a political commentator and columnist at The Telegraph, who wrote in her most recent column, "We are staring down the barrel of an ever more shambolic Britain with ever more clueless idiots in charge." And George Monbiot is an author and activist who describes himself as green with a small g, but says that the Green Party represents a plausible alternative to Labour. Good evening, welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Kettering. Very nice to see you. And welcome to all of you at home. Enjoy the programme, join in on social media, whichever you like. But we're going to get started with our first question, which is from Sharon Madeley.
Why are we being dragged into a war where there is no clear understanding of the long-term outcome?
Well, I must say, last week on Question Time, I didn't anticipate we'd be talking about a war this week, but here we are. A war where there's no clear understanding of the long-term outcome. Stephen?
Well, the Prime Minister set out two distinct decisions that he's made. The first was not to take part in the initial strikes by the US and Israel on Iran. But when it comes to our allies, our personnel, British interests being threatened, that he will allow permissions for defence of those assets and people. That is exactly the right decision to take. And I think in a situation like this, you need that consistent, thoughtful, credible leadership. This is clearly an extremely worrying situation, not least for the nearly 300,000 Brits. I'm sure there are people in the audience who have family members and friends who've potentially been stuck or affected by this. Our first priority is their safety and security, getting them out. It's supporting our armed forces personnel, including some who've been in action in the skies, defending our allies, our bases and our interests. And of course, it's ensuring that we find a negotiated way forward, that we reduce the instability and de-escalate the situation. That's exactly what the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, myself and others have been focused on in recent days.
James?
Well, the truth is that there is no war that's entered into where the outcome is certain. That's a desirable but undeliverable aim. But we've got to remember that Iran has been tiptoeing towards acquiring a nuclear weapon for some time. It's tried to do it slowly in the hope that no one day is so much worse than the day before that it will trigger a response. When I was Foreign Secretary, I said on a number of occasions, Israel is not going to allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. And if we don't want Israel to take a kinetic action as they have done, then we need to force Iran to abandon its nuclear aspirations. That was not successful. And sadly, the actions that we've seen this week, I thought were largely inevitable. Stephen said that the decision was made not to initially take part in those strikes, but it was more than that. The Prime Minister blocked the US from using its own equipment from British air bases. I think that was an error. I think it's damaged our reputation with the United States of America, not just with President Trump, but with their wider diplomatic and military circles.
I mean, when you've got, James, when you've got people like former NATO Commander General Sir Richard Shirreff and other military leaders have said that they thought Starmer reacted with a cool head and it was the right thing to do.
Well, opinions will vary, and there are other senior military and retired military leaders who I've spoken to, who have said that they think that he has appeared slow and indecisive, and it has damaged our reputation and relationship, not just with the United States of America, but with countries in the Middle East. And the reason I said a day late and a dollar short is he is now doing the right kind of things, but he's doing them later than he should have done. And that's got the worst of both worlds, in that we are now heavily involved. I think that was always going to happen anyway. But because he's been on the back foot, he has burnt through a relationship, and we have lost our seat at the top table of global influence because he has been slow off the mark.
And can I just check with you, Stephen, because I've just heard that John Healey, the Defence Secretary, says that HMS Dragon, the ship that's at Portsmouth, we were told only yesterday it was going to get to Cyprus by next week. It's now going to be 2 weeks. How can this be taking so long?
So I think the first thing to say, and I would challenge James on, is that the
Well, what about that? Why is it taking 2 weeks?
The Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary and all of our armed forces put in place a series of measures many months before this current situation in response to the rising threat in the region. We had F-35s in the region, we had radar equipment, we had anti-drone measures, we had air defence measures.
You've got a ship stuck in Portsmouth that's not going to get there. You've got France, you've got other countries sending their ships to Cyprus. They're going to get there before us.
And we also have pilots in the air, literally last night, who've been shooting down drones and missiles threatening our allies. So I think we need to be very careful to focusing on any individual piece of equipment, defending our bases, defending our allies, and ensuring that we're able to defend Britain's interests in many different aspects. We have put many of those in place, and it's simply not correct to say we've been late to the table.
But why is this ship taking 2 weeks?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to get into any individual operational decision. I think if we went into the individual facts about an individual ship...
There's a lot of head shaking going on in the audience here.
Is it because you don't know?
You're not Defence Secretary, I can understand that.
I'm not the Defence Secretary, but defending our bases and defending our people takes many different aspects. I've been in contact with our friends in Cyprus in the last few days. We have obviously had a range of measures in place there. The Prime Minister's announced the additional jets going out to Qatar. And as I said, we have RAF pilots and equipment in the air right now defending our interests and our allies.
Woman in the stripy top.
Yeah, last year, Trump did a strike in Israel, Iran, on the nuclear capability and declared it the most successful strike in the world ever. If that was so successful, it feels like he's waited for Netanyahu to cajole him long enough to then launch this strike. There was no evidence, as far as I'm aware, listening to various podcasts and people talking, that there was any sort of nuclear imminently. It feels like actually Trump just wants to go do a war. And why is Putin being let off the hook in Russia, doing exactly what he wants with Ukraine? It's just disgusting, really, that this is allowed to happen. And I agree. It feels actually to me like we actually have an adult in charge at the moment who is calm and thoughtful. Whether he makes the right decisions all the time, I'm not saying he does. However, it does feel like we have an adult in the room for once.
Shashank, you're saying that you don't... President Trump said it had been obliterated, effectively, the nuclear threat. And is there, in fact, an imminent threat? Is that what we should be responding to?
There is no imminent threat. There's no imminent threat. I heard President Trump say yesterday Iran was 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb, and that's simply untrue. It's wrong. It's false. James is right that Iran has had nuclear weapons aspirations, and he's right they've gone down that path, and that's got to be recognised here. Iran has lied about that. But fundamentally, Iran's nuclear program was no more materially advanced in a serious way 2 weeks ago than it was at the end of that 12-day war last year. And that is one of the reasons, in my view, this war was unnecessary and unwise. Ever-shifting war aims by Trump, who is saying he disclaims the idea of regime change, but in fact is arming a Kurdish force that is encouraged to attack inside Iran. And when you put that together, I can understand why no European leader could responsibly join in on a campaign like that on day one. But even if you think that this war is legal, or even if you think it has upsides, my biggest concern is the opportunity cost, because you mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned Russia, and I'm glad you did, because America is spending $1 billion per day on this campaign, in munitions, in operating costs. It is burning, along with Gulf states and others, through years' worth of air defense interceptors in days. And those are weapons you need for defending Kiev, and indeed for defending countries like Taiwan. And that's why I'm gravely concerned that this war, while I'm delighted to see the death of a dictator who's killed tens of thousands of his own people, and I'm glad to see Iranian missiles shot out of the sky, and I don't think that's being dragged in. I think that's the right course of action. This didn't need to happen, and it has a big opportunity cost for our other responsibilities around the world.
Okay, let's hear some more from our audience. Lots of hands up. Yes, the man there in the blue shirt and the jacket.
You say that you know, we've reacted slowly, which I think we have, but Trump has been amassing his military might in the Persian Gulf and that area for many weeks. Ships are slow, so why are we not putting our battleships in the Mediterranean way before now?
Right, why did we take so long?
Yeah.
Woman here.
Paraphrasing, but isn't it any fool can start a war, and once they've done so, it takes a wise man. And
A wise man can't end it, or takes a wise man to end it, something like that.
You've got it better than myself. It feels very much that listening to all the different people speaking, especially the rhetoric coming out of the States, you sometimes wonder just how much in touch they are with reality and the extent to which they are really concerned about all sides and the devastation it's going to cause to ordinary people. It just feels as if he's thinking it's expendable. Don't get me wrong, I don't really approve of the Iranian leadership. I think there were tensions there, but it just felt as if all of a sudden he just dived in without really thinking it through. And I still am not sure why and what his exit strategy is. And that's frightening, I think, for all of us.
Woman here.
Hello. HMS Dragon is at Portsmouth. So how many ships have we got in the Royal Navy fleet? Can't we send another ship, re-divert it somewhere? It's bad if we're only relying on one ship, isn't it?
Well, I presume we're not relying on one ship, are we? Or?
No, I mean, we have a range of capabilities in the Royal Navy, but what I would just take you back to is what I said about the different capabilities that you use to respond to the threat.
Okay.
F-35s, the Typhoons that Prime Minister announced today, air defence measures, anti-drone measures,
But
all
our
of
other
those together.
ships that we have in the fleet, surely they have this equipment on board?
So you're asking why hasn't one of them been
yes,
sent to get there
yes.
more quickly?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into the operational decision around one vessel. This is a whole series
Okay.
of measures,
All right, you've
and
made
they're in
that
place to defend our bases and our allies.
Annabel.
So the two words that have stood out to me from the discussion thus far are first consistent, and the insistence that the government's position has been consistent here. It hasn't. For a start, last April, Keir Starmer pledged to continue protecting Israel against Iranian aggression, and yet we're now a country that makes that sort of commitment and yet refuses to follow through on those assurances when our allies ask us for their support. And we are now at risk of looking unreliable, almost as though we're a bad faith actor. And that brings me to the second word that stood out, which is reputation, and this idea that we ought to have a seat at the top table. We don't anymore, and the reason for that is that for the last 2 decades, our defence policy has been a complete scandal in which both main parties have been complicit. We have allowed our armed forces to be completely hollowed out. We've refused to invest in them, despite the fact that politicians keep talking about how the peace dividend is over, how after Putin sent his tanks into Ukraine and launched that illegal war, we needed that investment in our defence capabilities. Some were even talking about 1930s rearmament. And indeed, Keir Starmer today was talking about how we must go further and faster on defence spending. And yet it's never set out how on earth we are going to reach 2.5%, 3%, 3.5%. Keir Starmer said that by 2035 we would be spending 5% of GDP on defence. And at the moment we're struggling to spend half that. And the reason for that is that our profligate politicians have this almost compulsive desire to spend money on other things, namely welfare, at the expense of investing in our armed forces. And they're often doing it with the best of intentions, but we're really starting to feel the effects of this. And the sense that I think the British public now has is of governments that have no plan, that are unable to prioritise our national security, and that there's a lack of appetite to hold on to those freedoms that 80 years ago were so hard fought for.
George?
Well, the question asked whether we're being dragged into a war with no clear outcomes. We're also being dragged into a war with no clear objectives. We've seen Trump say it's regime change. Oh, no, it's not regime change. It's because of the nuclear weapons. Oh, I wiped those out in June. There are no nuclear weapons. Oh, it's because of an imminent threat. No evidence whatsoever of an imminent threat. The real reason for this attack is spectacle. That's what Trump trades in. That's what he loves. He wants to be the center of attention. He wants to be making global headlines. That's his happy place. Now, for us to get dragged into that is not only criminal, it's foolish in the utmost degree. This war has no basis in international law whatsoever. There are two valid reasons why you can go to war. One is self-defense, and the other is if you've got a United Nations Security Council resolution. This has neither. James Cleverly has learnt nothing from Iraq, has learnt nothing from Afghanistan, has learnt nothing from Libya. What we see here is Donald Trump acting, as he always does, as a global chaos generator. And the further we stand away from that, the better off we will be.
George, let me just ask you, because it's clear this was clearly something you don't agree with. Now, you are a Green activist. You are not. You're Green with a small g. That's how you describe yourself. But you have described the Greens as a plausible alternative to Labour. But do you support the Green Party policy, leaving NATO, seeing the UK give up nuclear weapons? Is that something you support?
I don't support leaving NATO, actually. I think NATO's very important, and I think that Ukraine would greatly benefit from being part of NATO. I think that NATO membership is what keeps Poland and the Baltic states from being attacked so far by Russia. I would very strongly support Shashank's points about all this expenditure, all these munitions which Ukraine could have been using being diverted elsewhere instead. In fact, Zelensky has said that the US has already burnt through more PAC Patriot missiles in attacking Iran than have been made available to Ukraine in the entire course of that war. And so, you know, it's a massive opportunity cost, a massive wasted opportunity. It's also simply an illegal, illegitimate war in which we should play no part.
Man there with the glasses.
It very much feels like the press in general seems, especially the right-wing press, is out of touch with the general public on this issue, especially papers like The Telegraph being very much war hawks. Yet if you look at the polling, the majority of the British public does not want us to go to war in Iran. And furthermore, we are presented as an outlier. Oh, Britain, look at Keir Starmer, look at him being weak. One of our biggest allies, Spain, they're refusing to take part, and Trump's threatened to embargo them. So are we less, you know, not going to war, and are we more standing up to a bully?
Okay. Woman here in the front.
I'm just concerned about the thousands of people in Iran who are being blown up by bombs and horrible weaponry. I saw a funeral of schoolgirls on the television. It was horrible. And I'm just very concerned about Trump is saying he was doing it because he wants regime change. When we were bombed in the Blitz, did it make us more determined against our enemies, or did it mean we gave in? That's what I think. It's just, I don't think it's going to achieve anything. It's just going to mean people are going to die.
Okay. Man at the back there, in the middle.
The hypocrisy of people that are saying that Putin's war is illegal and then trying to usher through Trump's illegal war as if we should be a lapdog to the United States is quite breathtaking.
Let me just, I mean, it's not scientific, but I'm just interested, given what I'm hearing from you, can I have a show of hands? How many of you think this is a war that Britain should be involved in? Not many. A handful, I would say. Shashank, as someone who's spent more time studying Iran than probably all of us on the panel put together, where can you see this going in terms of either regime change or quite what could happen in Iran?
So I think what we're seeing is that the entire leadership has been obliterated and it's in complete tumult. You saw Trump say we identified potential successors to lead the regime, but then we killed all of them. And that's one of the reasons I'm concerned about the lack of thinking and planning about what happens next. There is a world, I think, in which the change to this regime is positive and good, and something sensible emerges out of this, a more democratic Iran. But right now, when I look at what's happening, the successor to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commander, who was killed 4 days ago, is a man, General Vahidi, who was associated with the bombing of a Jewish cultural site in Argentina in the 1990s. How is that progress? And my great concern is, whilst there is a chance something positive emerges, and that we see a more democratic Iran, and I'm sure many of us would absolutely welcome that after 40 years of tyranny, the problem is you can also see a future in which you see the dissolution of the Iranian state, the fragmentation of Iran, and the country moving in the direction of Syria. And for example, when you are encouraging Kurdish militias to attack Iran and encouraging ethnic minorities on the edges of Iran, the Baluch, the Azeris, to rise up, I'm gravely concerned you could see the disintegration of that country. And of course, the second order effect would be cataclysmic in terms of refugee flows, loose nuclear materials that Iran has buried under rubble, loose missiles. I think it would be a source of enormous concern. And so if you embark on a war like this, however good your intentions may be to seek a better Iran, you must have a plan and a sense of who is going to run this country in the weeks and months ahead.
James, I was very struck by something that your leader said in the House of Commons yesterday, where she said Britain should be shooting the archer, not the arrows. So the arrows are coming from Iran in the form of missiles. The archer, therefore, is Iran. Well, that's the case, isn't it? Presumably that sounds like what Kemi Badenoch is suggesting, is we should be attacking Iran.
Well, so the point that she was making is about the interception of incoming munitions. The point is that the military strikes into Iran are designed to neutralise their launch capability rather than air defence. And
But if she thinks we should stop the archer, what does that mean in practical terms for the UK armed forces?
That means striking at the launch capabilities of the missiles rather than missile intercepting.
Right, so we should be, what, with jets flying over Iran and bombing where the missiles are setting off from.
So the point...
I think that's what you're saying, is it?
So the point...
Is it? Is that what you're saying?
The point she was making is that... I mean, I will finish the first sentence, then I'll go to your second, third and fourth
Well,
question.
it's not. That's the question I'm asking, is literally
well, that's not the first question you're asking.
It is. I'm saying, what does that mean?
I'm still answering
What
your
does
first
stop
question
the archer mean? Does it mean...
I'm trying to explain.
Well, by all means do.
So the point that Kemi was saying is that, as we've already heard, intercepting missiles is a very expensive way of dealing with a threat, and is burning through Patriot systems and other systems that could be better used elsewhere. Striking the launch capability, whether we do it or allies do it, the US do it, a combination of the above do it, is a secondary point. The primary point is preventing the initial launch, and the launch capability is a much more effective way than what the UK is currently doing, which is using a very, very expensive capability, both in terms of fast jets and ground-to-air air defence systems. So preventing the launch is what we should be doing. And
OK, so hang on. So you still haven't answered my question. So I think what... Has he?
No.
What I'm asking you specifically is, when Kemi Badenoch said we need to stop the archer, i.e. where the missiles are being launched from in Iran, what do you imagine we are going to do that? Does that mean we'll be sending British jets over Iran and dropping bombs?
Well, there's been no request for that capability, and I don't know whether that is how we would best add to the collective defence of ourselves and our allies. I've been at COBRA meetings where there have been requests for a division of labour.
Okay, but it sounds like that's what she thinks we should be doing. That's what she said.
When she said we, she was talking not just about the UK, but the alliance of our friends and allies. She's always talked in those terms.
Okay.
But the point she was saying, and this is where I think Steve and I have a legitimate, and it's not even a political disagreement, but where Keir Starmer is saying, oh, we've got planes in the air intercepting drones, intercepting missiles, that's all well and good. But it's an incredibly expensive way of using very sophisticated, very expensive capabilities, taking out very cheap weapon systems. And if you keep doing that over and over again, you'll burn through your defences.
Do you want to answer?
And you're better off neutralising the launch sites.
Look, I'm somewhat surprised. I mean, I have a lot of respect for James, and you know, he did a very good job as Foreign Secretary and a Minister, and we've got on very well in the past. I am surprised and disappointed by the approach that Kerry Badmott's taken in this. I think we've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of Brits stranded and worried sick in the Middle East. We've got our armed forces in the air, putting their lives on the line. We've got our armed forces in bases at risk. And I think this is, you know, if I look at what we did in opposition, which coming behind the government on things like Ukraine and other issues, we need to see some unity. We need to see some coming together at a crucial time for British interests. I wanted to challenge the point, really, that was made about the top table. Keir Starmer has shown exactly what it is to be at the top table, and his leadership of the coalition of the willing, his leadership on Ukraine, his calm and measured approach to issues. I was just chairing the United Nations Security Council last week on the issue of Ukraine. The lady at the back was raising and standing up for Ukraine, challenging Russian lies in the Security Council. We are very much at the top table in the United Nations, in our armed forces, in our intelligence, in our diplomats. I'm incredibly proud of what our diplomats are doing right now in the Middle East, but across the world, and what our armed forces are doing. And I don't want to see Britain being talked down as we're seeing. And on defence spending...
Well, I mean, obviously Donald Trump is talking Britain down, big style.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about Keir Starmer, this is no Winston Churchill, talking about ruining the relationship. I mean, that's where the talking down's coming from.
Well, look, there is obviously a difference on this issue.
That's an understatement.
But what I will say is that it is for the Prime Minister to put Britain's interests first, according to our laws, our interests, the defence of our personnel, of our citizens across the Middle East, and indeed globally, and that's exactly what he's been doing, and that's the basis he'll take the decisions that he has done.
Except that based on reporting today, Keir Starmer isn't putting the national interest first, he's not putting the country first, he's putting himself and the Labour Party first, which is why we've had these reports that his position changed from Friday to Sunday in terms of allowing access to our bases, to America and to Israel, and there was a quartet of cabinet ministers who blocked him from doing so. And following the defeat in Gorton and Denton, that by-election last week, in which Labour came third, I think there is a very serious concern that Keir Starmer is putting the demands of backbenchers, of cabinet ministers, ahead of what he himself believes to be in the best interest of this country, because he thinks that it's to his electoral advantage to do so.
Not the case.
Man there in the dark jacket, yes.
Point that Shashank made. Do you think the Israeli government would be very happy with the outcome of a chaotic Iran with no real government?
Shashank?
I think that I acknowledge, first of all, that Israel has lived under the shadow of these missiles for a long time. And it's had to equip itself with missile defences of ballistic missiles raining down on its own cities indiscriminately in very difficult ways, and living under the shadow of a regime that's also sponsored armed radical groups on its periphery in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Iraq, including those that have killed British troops as well. So I'm not in any way going to diminish Israel's security concerns when it looks out at the regime it's faced for the last 30 years. Having said that, I have seen the way Israel has approached the new regime in Syria, where I think that they have created buffer zones, they have bombed it. I'm not sure they've dealt with it in the most constructive way. And I'm also, yes, concerned that Israel's interest in what they wish to see in Iran in the long run may not be what the interests of the United States or the Gulf Arab states or Europeans are. And although Israel may be happier with an Iran that is fragmented, that is unable to work on a nuclear program, that is more divided, I think that civil war or complete fragmentation in Iran, that is not a good outcome for us.
Okay. Man there in the green jacket, yeah.
Yeah, Tony Blair was vilified for blindly backing America in a phony war. So why is Keir Starmer being criticised for refusing to do the same?
George?
Well, this is a very important point, and I'm very glad that Keir Starmer is refusing. Trump says he's no Winston Churchill. Well, in this respect, I'm very happy that he's no Winston Churchill, because Winston Churchill did intervene in Iran, and we are living with the consequences of that today. So Churchill and his counterparts in the US launched a coup against the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953. because he was nationalising the oil industry. He said, this oil belongs to Iran, it shouldn't be all captured by the Anglo-Iranian oil company and siphoned out of our country and the wealth taken away from us. A perfectly reasonable position, but Churchill wasn't having any of that. He prompted the US, in particular the CIA, to launch a coup, overthrew Mossadegh, who was a highly popular leader. He was revered by his people to an extent that very few of ours ever are, and installed instead, reinstalled the Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, with his brutal, cruel regime. And when that regime was overthrown in the Iranian Revolution in 1979, one of the main reasons that people for that new revolution was the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953. So we are now living, or rather the Iranians are now living, with this brutal and horrible Ayatollah's regime, which was instituted in response to what the British and the Americans did before. This is what's called imperial blowback. And we think we're being so clever and so brilliant in wading in to countries about which our governments often seem to know very little, plunging in and firing missiles and staging coups and all the rest of it. But we don't think of those long-term outcomes, those long-term consequences, and the absolutely catastrophic effects that they can have many decades down the line.
Let's take another question, but before I do, I just want to tell you where we're going to be next week, which is in Wythenshawe. And after that, we're off to Croydon. So if you live in or around Wythenshawe or Croydon and you'd like to come be part of our audience and put your points, as you are all doing here in Kettering, go to the Question Time website, follow the instructions, and hopefully I shall see you there next week, Wythenshawe. OK, Simon Horrell, where are you sitting? Off you go.
Is it right to offer taxpayers money as an incentive to remove asylum seekers?
So, the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has made a number of announcements today regarding immigration, regarding new policies for asylum seekers, and one of them is to offer asylum seekers £10,000 each, up to £40,000 for a family of 4, to leave the UK. James.
Well, there is a precedent in encouraging people to leave the UK that shouldn't be here. We did it under our government. We didn't give as much money as this. But the thing that strikes me...
I think it was £3,000 when you were Home Secretary.
3,000. So a significantly small amount of money. But the idea behind it is not inherently a bad idea. Where my criticism comes is this is now the latest definite fix for a problem that I recognised was not easy. So I was told when I was Home Secretary and Yvette Cooper was the Shadow Home Secretary that the new Border Security Command that she was going to create would solve illegal migration, despite the fact it replicated a pre-existing organisation. Then we were told the one-in, one-out deal with France would solve the illegal migration situation. Then we were told restricting visas to certain countries would solve the illegal migration. And now it seems that increasing the money for voluntary returns is going to solve the illegal migration problem. None of those things on their own will. And my real frustration is because the incoming Labour government decided anything and everything the Conservatives did in office was clearly wrong. They tore up a lot of the work that we did, including the relationship that we'd built with Rwanda, which I know was contentious and I know was often unpopular, but nevertheless, we then heard other countries saying we need a third country relocation option like Rwanda. And even the Labour government itself started talking with Albania about a third country relocation partnership, just as we had done with Rwanda. The point being, migration control is not easy. I think the Labour government came in complacent and arrogant too willing to blame me and the Conservative government and not willing enough to actually listen to how difficult this is. So this is yet another definitely going to work proposal from a Labour Home Secretary, and we've seen illegal numbers go up and up and up.
Stephen.
Well, James said it himself. There is not one solution here to the challenge that's been set for us of both reducing net migration, removing people who have no right to be here, and of course reducing the costs. And he mentioned that Rwanda deal. Of course, that spent hundreds of billions of pounds of taxpayers' money, and I think in the end, I think there were 4 volunteers who eventually went on it. Absolutely extraordinary. So there are a whole series of measures that the Home Secretary is taking. She's announced visa breaks. She's announced the changes to the immigration rules. She's announced, obviously, the work we've been doing on hotels. They're at half the usage that they were at before. We've removed 60,000 people who have no right to be here. We've deported over 5,000 foreign criminals. So we're taking a series of measures. In the Foreign Office ourselves, we've introduced a new sanctions regime to tackle the people smugglers, those forging passports and shipping people across borders in this vile trade. So there is not one measure alone that will respond to this challenge. James has admitted that himself, and the Home Secretary has set out a whole of those in the strategies in the last few weeks.
Annabel, is it right to offer taxpayers' money as an incentive to remove asylum seekers?
Yes, what we saw today were sensible, if slightly timid, moves from the Home Secretary. We do need to have a multi-pronged approach.
And do you think the amount of money, because there's been quite a lot of criticism of the scale of the payoff?
Well, yes, but you have to consider that the current system is costing around £5 billion a year. This is an already extortionate cost that taxpayers are having to pay in order to sustain our completely dysfunctional asylum system. So we need to make staying here less attractive, which means doing things like clamping down on the shadow economy, and we need to bring in some financial incentives for people to leave. Now, I think that James was being a bit generous earlier to the Labour government. I think there are many politicians in the Labour Party who don't really want to bring down illegal migration and are reasonably comfortable with the status quo of around 40,000 people crossing the Channel every year in these filthy dinghies. But Shabana Mahmood, who seems to be a very impressive and forceful politician, I wish her luck trying to get these reforms past the Parliamentary Labour Party, understands the depth of public anger at the situation we have with illegal migration at the moment. People are absolutely at their wits' end at the sheer lawlessness of people coming across the Channel and leapfrogging those who are attempting to come to Britain to live and to work through legal routes. They're exasperated at the fact that nobody voted for this. There was no democratic mandate for mass migration. In fact, politicians, political parties kept coming to the public and promising in their manifestos that they were going to be the ones who were going to get a control on the immigration problem, and yet they failed to do so. And when you look at the rise of Reform and of the Green Party, it's no wonder, because you have such a strong sense of disillusionment with the establishment parties at the moment that it has opened up opportunities for new parties to enter the political fray.
Well, let's get a sense of that disillusionment or otherwise, because there's lots of hands up. So I'm trying to where to start. The man at the back with the glasses in the middle there. Yes.
If Labour stopped sending out the border force to go and pick them all halfway through the sea, and then start putting them in hotels like they are doing and giving them everything they want, maybe that would actually start persuading people not to come.
Okay. Man in the iron sweater there.
I'm glad James brought up the Rwanda. The simple maths, the 750 million that cost would pay off 75,000 people at £10,000 a person.
Okay.
Which is nearly 2 years' worth of boat people.
Man in the middle with a... I can't see what you're wearing. Is that a shirt? Yes. Yeah.
Why can't we have the Royal Navy police in the English Channel? Instead of the RNLI bringing them here.
And to do what? To turn the boats back? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, to take them back to France.
And how do you think they'd do that? Literally just turn the boats around, push them back?
No, by collecting them onto the ships and then taking them back to a port in France.
Okay. Man there in the white shirt and blue jacket.
It seems to me that this proposal is actually an incentive for people to come to the UK, not to leave the UK.
What, to get the money?
Yeah. A very generous sum of money.
And obviously some of them have paid people smugglers even more than that to come here, but I take your point. And woman just in front of you, yes.
Well, part of the issue is the illegal migration into the country, like with the boats. But there's very few legal ways for people to claim refugee status to come to this country other than through those routes. We've already said about Iran and the possibility that's going to increase the refugee status. Well, how will people be able to come to this country and claim refugee status if they don't do it via the boats?
Yes, Stephen, so when it comes to safe and legal routes, I noticed that the Home Secretary today talked about increasing the number of them, but for students only. Have I got that right?
Well, there are obviously a range of safe and legal routes for migration, and obviously that's what we want people to use.
But in terms of these new ones, why just students?
Well, we're being led by the data here, which is where we see people abusing or misusing the system, and whether that's the asylum system or whether it's student visas, we're being led by that. That's why she's announced a number of visa breaks today on certain countries where we've seen people try and switch from one visa to making an asylum claim, and we're going to be led by that. We're a fair, compassionate and law-abiding country. It's important our immigration system reflects that, and it's important that we bring down net migration, bring down the costs, but also ensure that we are also fair and compassionate and there are those safe and legal routes.
Is it right to offer taxpayers money as an incentive to remove asylum seekers, George? That's the question.
Well, the whole discussion has been about the problem of asylum and the chaos surrounding it in this country, and there is indeed that problem. But there is another problem as well, which is the problem that refugees face. And this is, I think, a much graver problem than the ones that we complain about. In many countries, like Iran, which we were discussing before, like Eritrea, like Sudan, very large numbers of people are at imminent risk to their lives, suffer the most horrendous persecution, torture, rape, terrible things happening. And my worry about this whole discussion is that we end up talking about what's good for us and forget about what's good for people, well, people like my own ancestors. Two groups of refugees in my family, both of whom would have been excluded by the current system and probably would have died as a result.
So do you think it should be welcome to anyone who wants to come here?
No, I'm not calling for open borders. That's not one of the things I believe in. And I believe we should have a regulated system, we should have a sensible system, but we should have a generous system. And my concern throughout this discussion, and all the discussions around it, is that we tend towards meanness. We tend towards looking at ways in which we can reduce the number of people being granted refugee status in this country. Whereas, you know, and I'm not putting a number on it, and I'm not saying we take vast numbers of people, but the motive force of the decisions we make should be generosity.
But, George, so when someone comes here, when someone arrives here, their accommodation costs comes out of the ODA budget, the Official Development Assistance budget. That's the same budget that we use to try and alleviate poverty, to prevent infant mortality, the eradication of disease overseas, and you can't spend it twice. So for me, when I was Foreign Secretary, I would have much preferred that we spent our official development assistance money eradicating the problem, whether it be disease, war, or famine, in the countries of origin, rather than waiting for people to come to the UK and spend the money less efficiently here in the UK. Well, and you've got to have a system, and what you're saying implies you can't.
No, we do have to have a system. Number one, it shouldn't be coming out of the ODA budgets.
It does.
Should be it should not be. And that is a decision which governments make. It's the wrong decision. But number two, you're absolutely right, of course, that we should be engaging with problems at source. We should be working much harder on preventing climate breakdown, doing far more, because this is a problem which is now the primary cause of people having to leave their homes and seek refuge elsewhere. And it's a problem which is overwhelmingly caused by the rich countries and yet visited upon the poor countries. We should be doing everything within our power to prevent warfare, to stop sending arms to regimes which are using them for genocide, for murder, for terrible things that are happening around the world and forcing people to leave their homes. We can do both, we should do both.
Shashank.
I'd also like to reflect on a couple of other aspects of the Home Secretary's reforms that I think I have some reservations about. One of them is some of these changes are retroactive. So people who came to the country previously expecting certain things and certain paths to citizenship are now facing a change. I think the other thing is, of course, lots of these reforms have been modelled on, and we've seen references to the Danish model and Denmark. And Denmark has brought down some of these asylum numbers, and of course they've had a centre-left government that's done it and prospered politically from doing it, and I understand the politics of that. But I also see having a more precarious path for these asylum seekers, in which citizenship is decades away and pushed further into the distance. I'm not sure that achieves what I think a lot of us around the table would agree on, which is more assimilation and integration of migrants. If you look at the numbers, immigrants and the children of immigrants in Denmark have far lower levels of attainment on English, on maths, than they do in the UK. We are good at that assimilation. We're good at that integration. And my worry is if you kick this into the distance and say you can't apply for citizenship for 20 years, 30 years,
what you're talking
that's
about
a problem.
Is refugee status would be reviewed every 2.5 years until they reach 20 years. And at that point, they could apply for or be eligible for indefinite leave.
And I think I'm not sure that if our aim here is to have citizens contributing in a stable, predictable way, that the answer to that is to say you're here on our sufferance and you're here on a precarious basis.
Okay, all right. I'm sure we'll come back to this subject, but I'm going to take another question. I've not got that much time left. Dave Moscow. There you go. Let's hear your question.
The Chancellor says people will be £1,000 better off, but many people feel worse off than ever. Are people wrong, or is the Chancellor wrong?
And is that how do you feel about it, Dave?
Well, I feel that the price of groceries shopping has gone up so much over the last few years. Council taxes rose by the maximum levels each year. And income tax threshold levels are remaining the same, but yet more and more people are then going into the high tax band, and also obviously the minimum tax band as well, which is acting obviously as a stealth tax, and it's just reducing the amount of money that people have got in their pockets each and every week.
Okay, Annabel.
I think that the Chancellor is wrong. That probably won't surprise you. And that people are suffering through a cost of living crisis in this country. Real wages have stagnated. Prices are just going up and up. Inflation is well over the Bank of England's target of 2%, which means that the cost of everything is simply increasing. And perhaps in the worst area of all is people's energy bills. And it's simply inexcusable that we are taking the path to net zero that we are, where we are just putting pedal to the metal, despite the costs for people living in this country. And we're doing so when, and this is a statistic that comes out often, but it bears repeating, we are responsible for 1% of global emissions. Now, none of this is to say...
George is raising his eyes at that.
None of this is to say that we don't decarbonise. What it does say is that we need a sensible approach. We need to accept that fossil fuels will be a part of our low-carbon transition. When you still need a supply of something, what you do not do is undermine that supply for as long as it's required. And when you do that, you end up in a situation, as we've had this week, where there's been a surge in gas prices, and we are exposed to these massive fluctuations in international markets. So that's just one thing that the government can do, but there's a whole list of others. And everything that we have seen from Rachel Reeves thus far is essentially a fudge. So she's talked about rail fares, she's talked about childcare, she's talked about free breakfast clubs. All she is doing is putting additional costs onto the taxpayer. And there was a statistic that came out today, which I think just was so stark, which was that income tax, the amount of money that the government is expecting to generate from it this year will be £329 billion. And the welfare bill this year is expected to be £330 billion. We are in a situation where many people who are in work are being forced to pay for some people, certainly not all, who are choosing not to. And I find it extraordinary that a government that talks so much about fairness is unwilling to address that.
Okay, George, you look fit to burst, so you better come in quickly.
I must congratulate Annabel on being so wrong on so many issues in a single answer. It must be just about a world record. So when it comes to energy costs, the reason our electricity is expensive is because the cost the price is pegged to the cost of gas. It's a completely irrational system, but it's the fossil gas, which keeps those prices high. Renewables...
Because it's the energy of
electricity.
last resort. That's why.
Well, yes, that's right. But it can be done differently. Spain does it has a different system for the pricing of electricity, and electricity is much cheaper there. If it were pegged to the price of renewables, it would be far, far cheaper because renewables deliver much cheaper electricity. What this week has shown is the utter madness of our reliance on gas and oil, because that makes us extremely strategically vulnerable. As soon as
with what's going on in the Middle East.
Well, exactly. We see the Straits of Hormuz effectively being closed, or the threat that they'll be completely closed. Shipping can't go through it. The insurers would never allow it. As a result of that, gas prices go vroom. And as a result, our domestic bills go vroom. If we want energy security and we want cheap energy, we should be producing it as much as possible from renewables on our own ground.
Except that none of that addresses the intermittency issue of renewables. What happens when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow?
Okay, well done. You've added another one.
Reliable backup.
Fantastic.
And actually,
Quick, briefly, George. No one else on the panel is going to get a word in.
Something on which George and I might agree, by the way, is that we ought to invest in nuclear energy.
Like so much of what you've said, these are zombie arguments. These are systems problems which have been solved. Well, because intermittency is solved with balancing across many different energy sources, particularly with the use of what are called interconnectors, which are cables joining us to the European Union and the rest of it. Anyway,
right. Let's come back to the question in hand. The Chancellor says people, call me old-fashioned. The Chancellor says people will be £1,000 better off, and many feel worse off than ever. So let's just talk about this £1,000, Stephen. Because this is what Rachel Rees has claimed, that by the end of the Parliament, people will be £1,000 better off per year. That has been questioned by a number of organisations. Some are saying it could actually be more like £40. People might actually be worse off, depending on where you start your statistic. And then, this is a pretty startling fact. In April 2025, after adjusting for inflation, median weekly pay for full-time employees was 2% lower than in 2008. Now, that's from the Office for National Statistics. So how are people like Dave, who's asked this question, supposed to feel better off?
Well, Dave is absolutely right to ask this question, and I have many constituents who come to me in my surgeries every week and contact in my office who are struggling with making ends meet, whether it's about their rent, whether it's about their cost of childcare, it's about other things. That's exactly why we are taking the measures that we are, whether it's on the 30 hours free childcare offer, whether it's the steps we're taking to bring down energy bills by £117, whether it's the freezing of the prescription charges, whether it's the freezing of the rail fares. And the good news that the Chancellor was able to set out this week was that the economy is going to grow, that we are seeing inflation coming down, that we have been seeing interest rates coming down, but the economy the economy is growing, and we are also bringing down inflation. We're bringing down interest rates. We are investing in health, in education, in transport, in all the things that are going to make a difference to people's lives here in Kettering, and that is what's going to make that difference to make people feel better off. Of course, it was the OBR that gave that 1,000 figure, and actually, if you look at some of the other statistics the Chancellor was able to set out, I think GDP per capita is going to be, 2,700 higher by the end of this Parliament. And on the energy costs, which I think is absolutely right to raise, this is a crucial issue that people are facing. I was with the Energy Secretary today when he was speaking to Parliament. People have got genuine concerns about this. That's exactly why we are investing in solar, in wind and in nuclear, so that we are not subject to the risks that come from the type of global instability that we have seen. And on that, I absolutely agree.
Everything that Stephen has listed is government spending. When is politicians going to learn that one way that we get growth,
and those with the broadest
jobs, and we
shoulders
get
will be paying more,
productivity,
and
we get entrepreneurship and enterprise and businesses growing, is by getting government out of the way?
We've got 5 minutes left, and I'm going to come to you, but I just want to bring the audience as well. The woman got a black top on, I think, yes.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that people are 2% worse off when a 5% pay rise has just been approved for MPs, meaning the average MP will earn £98,000, set to rise to £110,000 by 2029.
Which I assume you think they shouldn't get, by the sounds of it. A man here in the front in the white top.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'll say I'm an insolvency practitioner, and I can't say I've been this busy since 1993. The MPs, you all get it wrong. You keep looking for things to win votes. You forget about the companies that employ these people. If you do not do anything to help those businesses, their cash flow means they cannot employ those people. And so those individuals, their cost of living gets worse, while the government, because they don't promote companies, lose out on massive tax revenue that a flourishing business could provide.
Shashank.
Yeah, well, I mean, what worries me profoundly is that at the same time as we have all of these shocks we've just heard, this massive energy shock coming over the horizon, some of the questions around the way AI will affect our economies and work, transatlantic tensions, trade war, trade globalization is unwinding in some respects. As all of that is happening, what worries me greatly is that we still have a huge problem of defence spending, and defence spending at a time when the war in Europe is raging, in which Russia is rearming and spending 8% plus of its GDP on defence, in which obviously we've seen chaos in the Middle East. And from our point of view, in the UK, yes, we have made big commitments on spending, but those commitments mostly come to fruition in the next decade, far, far away from when these threats are manifesting. Right now, defence spending in real terms is largely flat for the time being. Real money doesn't begin appearing for defence until about 2027. And if you look at where we are on our NATO capability targets, there are 32 members of NATO. We are 31 out of 32. I think it's just the Canadians below us. And I'm not offering any easy solutions to this, because I'm not pretending we don't have the problem of the energy cost of living crisis and energy crisis and these profound structural issues coming over the horizon. But that worries me enormously, that right now our forces sitting in Estonia and other countries frankly just aren't prepared for the sorts of drone barrages and profound threats that we're seeing manifest in the Gulf right now.
James, I've got a couple of minutes left.
Well, the Chancellor is wrong. People can feel this, and there's no amount of smoke and mirrors or gaslighting that is going to convince people that actually they're better off when they are demonstrably not better off. And it's choices. Stephen keeps talking about these kind of external factors as if the government's got nothing to do with it. These are choices. The Chancellor chose to increase the tax on employing people. The Chancellor chose to increase the cost of employing young people. Youth unemployment is at the highest level since COVID. Unemployment is going up. Sir, businesses keep being told by the government that business rates are coming down. I've seen the bills. Business rates are going up. Businesses are going under. And it's a choice. It would be bad enough if it was a choice by the Chancellor herself. But it isn't. She has been bullied into it by Labour backbenchers. And Starmer doesn't have enough backbone or political authority to stand up to his own backbenchers. Last year, Labour MPs that voted to voted to scrap the two-child benefit cap had the whip removed. This year, the government is claiming this massive increase in benefit spending is a good idea. And as Annabella said, when the benefits bill is bigger than the income tax bill, when the rider is bigger than the horse, the maths just doesn't stack up.
It's going to lift
entrepreneurs,
2,500 children out of poverty.
Then
here
why
in
did
Kettering.
you remove the whip?
Well, it's your choice, Jay. This is a choice.
So why did
I'm interested in lifting 2,500 children out of poverty here in Kettering.
So why?
And that's the choice the Chancellor has made on that issue.
So why did your party, your government, remove the whip from Labour MPs that voted for that policy last year?
The Chancellor has made the decision that
Why did they remove the whip?
She has made the decision that that's going to lift children out of poverty here in Kettering.
It's
That's
because
what matters on the
listen,
ground.
we are out of time, and I can see that you're not going to answer his question, and you're going to keep going, and it's not really going to get us anywhere. But by all means, carry on the discussion afterwards, because I'm so sorry we're out of time. That's it from Question Time this week. From the panel, thank you very much. From our audience, thank you very much as well. You won't be aware at home, but a couple of people were taken ill during the programme, and I just want to say on behalf of all of us, we wish them all the very best.
Yeah.
From Question Time this week, until next time, bye-bye.